Okay, now we are going to record this session. We're going to record this part of the event. Good morning, everyone. Okay, good to see you all. Good to see you. Hello, hello. Good morning. Let's allow some more participants to join. I know we are expecting a few more people here, so we're kind of trying. Do you want to say hi? Do you want to say hello, where you're from? Hello, hello. You can write on the chat. You can also, exchange your names of the institutions, schools.
Hello from Germany.
German. Oh, I hear Ron. Hey, Ron.
Hello.
Nice to hear you again, Ron. Back for
Hello.
more, I see. All right. Another 9
I can't stop learning about artificial intelligence.
Right on, right on. Ron was in a workshop with me a couple of weeks ago. So
you're in a good company here. We are all here for that reason, really passionate about new technology, whether passionate or not, but we have no choice but learning more about it and experiencing with it. Again, we are welcoming Sam Gravel this morning, and my name is Dr. Elena Mizrahi with Western Galilee College Technical Virtual Exchange Center. I'm going to be muting you all soon, and Sam will introduce himself in a moment. Shall we begin? I think it's about time, right, Sam? So
let's go.
Okay.
A lot to talk about, so let's get started.
Thank you for joining us this morning. We're so excited.
89 participants.
And counting.
Counting. They're still rolling in. All right. Should I get started, Elena? Should I just start introducing myself?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
We're recording this. People can always go back and watch this from the beginning. I'm sure many of them will, because the information you usually share in your webinars is so precious, so interesting. So we're really excited, and we're looking forward to this webinar and workshop. And so let's get started.
All right, I'm happy to be here. So welcome everybody once again. So look, I kind of used a really big title to get you here, Revolutionizing ELT. Could we meet our...
I'm gonna keep everyone muted, don't worry. Thank you. Sorry, Sam, now I muted you as well. You were a host as well, but for some reason I managed to mute you. Can you unmute yourself? Ask. Then unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect.
All right. All right. So fingers crossed this all. Okay, so yeah, so Revolutionizing ELT. That's a really big title, really big promise. And I use that title to get you here. I don't know if we're going to change the whole field today, right? The massive field of English language teaching, but I do hope to give you some ideas about how to revolutionize your own workflow, the workflow of your colleagues, teammates, and people you work with. So that's my hope for today, and you can share with me later if that goal was accomplished. So here's a little bit about me. So why am I here speaking to you today? I'm a business English trainer and consultant based in Germany. I work as an embedded corporate trainer, so it's quite a unique context. So basically, my role involves being embedded in usually a department or an office or a workplace of the same people, the same company, and doing everything from needs analysis to training, design, and delivery to assessment. So I've got quite a lot of experience with the whole cycle. And in my context, it's very important that people actually improve their ability to do things in English, right? So we'll talk more about that today, but that's kind of at the forefront of my training, right, of my teaching. Yeah, and so basically, I'm also here because I was, an early adopter, I would say, of this. I just luckily stumbled into this technology. I've always had an interest in ed technology, but I stumbled into this when it first came out. I was very excited about it. So I started writing and sharing immediately, right? So I hope that some of my ideas today will encourage and inspire you. And who are you? Well, there are so many of you here today, which is amazing. And unfortunately, this is what I have about you. So this is a very small snapshot. This is a much bigger document compiled of the survey that you all graciously took for us. And so this is great because of course, I'm always going to collect the needs of the people that I'm going to be delivering training to or delivering workshops to, right? And it's really important. But there's not a lot that I can do to get my head around this. So before we even jump in with any of the real ChatGPT stuff today, I thought I'd show you one interesting way that I've used this just to help me set up the workshop that might be of use to you. So I've basically taken all this information, just a lot of text collected from the survey, and I have used ChatGPT. And so ChatGPT, if you have the paid version, ChatGPT Plus, you can use a plugin called Code Interpreter. And what's really exciting about Code Interpreter is you can simply add files, programs, pictures, and it can actually open that and do things with it. So I've simply added that Excel sheet in here and said, I'm delivering a workshop. I've sent out a needs analysis. Can you analyze this and give me key insights to help me plan appropriately? And voila, I've got this wonderful overview of all the information collected about you with ChatGPT's 2 cents about how that might be interesting and important to incorporate into the planning. So you can see I have here some insights about your main questions, your main uses, what you want to take away from the workshop, right? Now, if you're more of a visual person, you might also find this interesting. This is a plugin that can be used with ChatGPT 4, and this is called Diagram. We could talk more about plugins later if you have questions about that, but it's kind of a very exciting, in my opinion, addition to ChatGPT 4 that really adds to its capabilities and also sort of gets rid of a lot of the limitations of earlier versions. So using this plugin, I simply put in the information from the survey and said, I'd like to have some visual insights about the people that I'm going to be speaking to today. And so as you can see here, now we know just with a couple of clicks that a majority of people are in higher education in the school setting. We've got some in private language schools, some corporate people like me, hello to you, and some other contexts as well, right? So that's pretty good to know because that will help me determine the sort of things that I'd share with you today. What else can we glean from this? Well, most people here have experimented a bit with ChatGPT. Some, still about a quarter, have not used it at all. And then there are some experts here as well, and I'm sure they will be happy to share their ideas with us later also. So now we have a bit of an understanding about where people are coming from today. And here's some information about the most common questions and concerns, right? And this gives me some insight about what people are looking to gain from this, right? So again, this is ChatGPT Diagram plugin, really interesting and really nice way to help you analyze data when it comes to something like needs analysis, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Okay, so on to the next thing. I'd love to do a little quiz with you on some of the main topics from today. So if you could actually, sorry, what I will do is have you join this. I'll give you a second if you want to use your phone and use a QR code. Just go ahead and scan that QR code for this Menti. If not, you can simply go in and type this in. I'll give you a couple more seconds to get on there because I'd like to make this full screen and then the QR code will go away. So your choice, you can do this in a browser or you can do this on your phone. There we go. We've already got a couple of answers coming in. I'll make this full screen. Sorry. There we go. All right, so we've got, again, we're just assessing our knowledge here and then maybe learning a couple things along the way. We're going to cover some basic questions about GPT, right? And then we're going to move into some questions about teaching methodology and how languages are learned. So, all right, it's about half and half. Oh, the battle. I think people are just trying to keep it even now, just for the fun of it. Team blue or team pink? Okay. Let's do maybe 10 more seconds here. We don't want to spend too much time. Don't worry, you're not graded on this exam. It's just for fun. So, the answer is generative pre-trained transformer. Yeah, generative pre-trained transformer, right? Okay, on to the next question. How does ChatGPT generate its responses? All right, number one is growing in popularity. We will see if that's the answer. I'm really surprised nobody chose the fourth option. Okay, maybe 10 more seconds on this one.
The fourth one is not artificial intelligence.
Right.
Correct. It's all a sham, right? It's just labeled as artificial intelligence. And there's actually a lot of people instantaneously answering your questions. Of course,
like the little man in the refrigerator who turns on the light when you open the door.
That's right. That's how technology that we don't understand works, right? So number one, it's important to know that number one is not true. And that's really important for understanding how this technology works, right? And it's not really the point of today's seminar to go in detail about large language models, this type of artificial intelligence. We're more going to be exploring practical uses and pedagogy. But it's important to know that it's not searching the web for answers, and that's not the way that it works. Instead, it uses machine learning to predict what the answer is. And that's a little bit difficult to get our heads around. But you can think of it as something that is trained on massive amounts of data, what normally happens with all of this data, and then using that to predict the answers that come next. Okay, let's go on to the next one. How does ChatGPT handle inappropriate requests? And by that, I mean, illegal or offensive in whatever way deemed so by the producers.
It's interesting that people are still trying to register for the webinar. We have some latecomers.
Wow. Okay. Not very punctual. All right.
Still almost 2 hours.
I registered again because I didn't get the link.
Oh, okay. So we're happy that you're here, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, wonderful.
Okay, so let's have a look here. Let's see. I think, yes, it refuses to generate them based on safety filters, right? If you've been following ChatGPT and interesting news stories about it, you might see that there's ways around this and that people have found hacks and, telling ChatGPT, well, just play the role of somebody who can do this. And there's all kinds of interesting things to be discovered there. But this is generally the principle. As a large language model, I cannot so-and-so. Okay. Okay, not sure we should have drawing permission on here and that sort of thing. So can we just make sure that that is disabled, Elena? All right. On to the next question. How does OpenAI claim that they handle your data? Right. And I use the word claim because I think with any technology, especially with this sort of digital social technology, we need to really take everything we read with a grain of salt, right? But what do they say? What is their policy, right? If you read the fine print. Okay, about 10 seconds left. And for those of you who missed the QR code, you can still join. Just you can jump right in if you go to menti.com and type in the code. at the top here. You're free to join at any time. I see we've only got about 38 in the quiz out of about 120 participants. So jump right in if you'd like to. It's not too late.
Yeah, how many questions do you have left, Sam? Maybe you can also share a link to this with us in the chat. But it's okay if there are just a few left. Then you see there is a voting.
Yeah.
You can put it in the chat, and then people will just click on it in the Zoom.
Yeah.
You just put your mouse over this Menti, join Menti.
Yeah. Now it's, yeah, I don't like.
Never mind.
Yeah, let's just, because the problem is this Zoom toolbar gets in my way and causes me I know what you mean, though. It's a good idea, but it's not a big deal. So I see we've already got 41, so it's fine. So let's see, how does OpenAI claim that they handle your data? And the answer is yes, they claim that it's deleted as soon as it's deleted from your ChatGPT history. With the exception that you have an option in your security settings, if you have an OpenAI account, to allow them to collect data for further training, right? So that's actually a tick box you can check if you are interested in letting your data or not letting your data be collected. But as always, a grain of salt, right? Okay, if a piece of content is generated by ChatGPT, who holds the copyright? This question comes up a lot, right? When we create content, if I create a nice text with ChatGPT, is it mine? Is it theirs? What's the deal with that?
That's a very interesting question.
Yeah, this comes up a lot in the initial questions, right? Some version of this question, because it's good to know, right? Right, a lot of opinions here. Okay, about 10 seconds.
I'm sorry, I came in late. This is a poll. We're supposed to be reacting to this? You
can if you'd like. Yeah, if you go to menti.com, you can type in the code that you see there at the top, and this gives you a chance to participate in the quiz to assess our kind of initial knowledge with some of this stuff. And you can also just follow along if you'd like. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. From what I understand, the user holds the copyright technically. So it is now your material. I know that's kind of a surprising answer here. But if you produce something, it belongs to you in the way that anything else you produce belongs to you, right? I don't know the technicalities of copyright law, but I do understand that it belongs to you if you've used ChatGPT to produce it, not OpenAI. And if you copyright it as having produced it, it is your material. Now, whether you want to share or not with others that ChatGPT helped you create it, that is an issue that is also worth talking about with your colleagues and coming to some kind of consensus on, right? Personally, as you'll see, I create a ton of material with ChatGPT. I don't see it as any kind of cheating. And in fact, I use it with my learners and they completely approve. So I don't hide anything about it from my participants. Okay, a couple more questions here. What is the difference between the free and the paid versions of ChatGPT? Right, so you might know that anybody can just get on and start using basically right away, but then you can pay 20 euros, $20 per month, I believe, to access something different. And yes, that's exactly. Yeah. Okay, about 8 seconds on this one. Yeah, it seems like a bit of a tricky wording here, but technically they do upgrade the free version. They don't provide it with all of the features of the paid version. You don't get access to plugins and this sort of thing. but they technically do upgrade the free version and now and then. The main difference is that the paid version gets you, in the beginning, I showed you Code Interpreter, right? And I'll show you a few other plugins today. And those are part of the paid version. So with the paid version, you get access to GPT-4, which is a more advanced large language model, capable of much more advanced reasoning and tasks. And you also get access to these plugins, which again are advanced features of ChatGPT that allow you to do different things like upload files, browse the web, and that kind of thing. Okay, we're going to get into some questions about language learning here and about language learning theory. And you'll discover why that's important as we go throughout today's workshop. But these will be important to know something about as well. So let's just see where we're coming from. So the interaction hypothesis in second language acquisition. All right, we've got some consensus here, it seems. I always wonder to what degree the social sort of, oh, look, 30 other people, it must be the answer, right? As we wonder what effect it has to see other people's answers coming in.
Share the link to this, Paul, in the chat now. So if you're not there, you can click on the link directly from the chat and have access to vote now.
Thank you, Elena. Thanks. Prevents me from having to accidentally click on the wrong thing here. Okay, so these are some, I would say that these are all beliefs that certain people have about language learning. Let's see which one is the interaction hypothesis. Yes, a result of social interaction. Negotiation for meaning plays a crucial role, right? So the first choice here is more of a sort of, I guess it's more in line with Krashen's sort of comprehensible input hypothesis. Well, Long took that further and said, yes, of course, we need input, right? But is input sufficient, right? And we really acquire through interaction and through negotiating for meaning. The last choice is not a particularly popular view when it comes to most scholars of second language acquisition. Okay, a couple more questions along this topic. According to SLA, what are some problems with the traditional PPP approach, right? And what that is, if you're not sure, is I present to you some language items like set of vocabulary words or a grammar structure. You do some practice, and then you're asked to produce that freely. Very typical in sort of a course book approach or a CELTA style lesson. Right. All right. We'll give this 8 or 10 seconds. Yes. So whoever chose the third one, you're technically correct, but so are these other ones. Yeah. So it doesn't allow for individual differences. Focuses too much on explicit learning when we know language learning is mostly implicit, right? It's generally agreed upon that language learning is, more like learning something extremely complex, more akin to swimming, or it's not the best analogy ever, but it's less like learning history facts and applying them on an exam, right? And anyone who has learned a second language kind of understands that it's not about learning rules and applying them, right? Yeah, so those are some of the downfalls, right? And so what I will not say so explicitly today, but hopefully show, is that in my idea, revolutionizing language teaching, right, because that's the title, is not finding shinier, quicker ways to do this, but instead finding ways to use this technology to skillfully implement more research-supported and more effective ways of approaching language teaching. We're almost there. We're almost through the quiz. Okay, so couple more questions here. What does the concept of an internal syllabus refer to? Again, a second language acquisition related question. So we've already covered one use of ChatGPT, which was analyzing the information that you gave me, right? So I could analyze your needs and produce some graphics to help me think about this. To disclose, and here's another use of ChatGPT, I asked ChatGPT to help me come up with good answers for these questions, options for answers for these questions. Of course, I always double check everything, but that did save me some time to come up with some answers that might not be obviously wrong, but are actually wrong. And yes, the answer to this is that what we understand is that learners have their own internal organizing principles of the way that they acquire language, and that there are believed to be similarities across people, but also unique things, and that everybody is at a different part of their language learning journey, regardless of the curriculum set by the school, the teacher, the course book writers. Essentially what this means is if I present to you the present perfect in a PPP lesson, there's little to no idea on my side that you are ready for that tense, right? That you acquire things in a particular and very complex way. And you mostly get that through practice and lots of exposure to input, and not because I said that today's the day we learn the present perfect, right? So it's a very important thing to understand, and it really helped me to change the way that I approached language teaching, for sure. Okay, how is a task defined in task-based language teaching? Tough one, right? All right, about 5 seconds here. And if you said either of these, you are correct. Yeah. So there is not one clear definition of task. There are multiple. They do share things, and that they're always involving authentic communication. There is more of a sort of hard TBLT, and then a kind of softer TBLT, you might put it that way. We'll look at a little bit at both today as we go through some of the ChatGPT uses. But according to one conception, it is a real world activity and requiring language use. So ordering a ticket, giving a presentation, telling a story, having a discussion, things we do in life with language, something I'm doing right now, is a task. Whereas some are a little bit less strict with that and say, okay, as long as people are communicating for a purpose that is outside of language, like learning, right? So exchanging ideas, coming up with a plan together, listing, ranking, there's a number of different tasks that people might do in a learning setting that are communicative, and where the aim isn't to practice this structure of the day. And that those are also tasks. And personally, I agree with both of those definitions, depending on who you're working with and what you're trying to accomplish. So both are correct. But which is not a type of task? This is kind of the nitty gritty, right? So don't worry if you, but it seems that the last one kind of has given you some insight into this when people are jumping on the grammar task. Yes, if you talk to a TBLT purist, do not call a grammar exercise or activity, don't call it a task, call it a grammar exercise, because again, a task is communicative, and using language for the sake of language is not communicative, right? Expressing, interpreting, negotiating meaning, as Bill Van Patten has defined communication, is not practicing grammar. It's okay if you call it a task as well, right? I mean, I do that sometimes too. So, okay, we are nearing the end here, I promise. But what is the primary purpose of a needs analysis in task-based language teaching? This is a very important part of the kind of TBLT that I mentioned in the beginning, where we are focusing on the harder version of TBLT, of people doing things in the real world. Okay, about 10 seconds here. Yes, so we have the majority here was correct. To identify the specific language tasks that the learner will need to accomplish in their life outside the classroom, right? Something that is often neglected for various reasons. And to me, one of the ways of revolutionizing language teaching, in my understanding, would be to align more language teaching with this category here, right? Of basing our teaching, basing the curriculum and syllabus basically on the kinds of things that people need to do with language, right? Okay, let's do this one rather quickly so we can start to get into some of the fun stuff today. So I'll just make this one fast. How is the assessment different? So based on your understanding of the things we've discussed so far, yeah, that's it. Okay. Okay, if you have any quick remaining questions about this topic, you may type them here. I mean, basic ChatGPT questions, so you can save the kind of specific questions about how to do things with ChatGPT until later to see if you learn them. But if you've got any sort of basic questions that you need to know right now, you may enter them here. So we did have a few who had never used ChatGPT. So I can understand if some of this was a little over your head if you've never even logged into ChatGPT. The paid version of ChatGPT is $20 per month, I believe. That's the last number that I knew. I hope it is, because that's what I'm paying for it. So yeah, 20 per month. Now, this is a personal choice. It depends on how much you might use this and what you want to get out of it. In my opinion, people have asked me, is it worth it? I say yes, it's been really worth it for me. And I'll hopefully demonstrate today why. Okay, all right, so okay, how do we teach students to use ChatGPT to improve their language skills? Okay, that we should answer in the presentation. Plagiarism, yes. One and two-way tasks. Okay. ChatGPT is still a topic to discuss in terms of plagiarism. So back to my context, plagiarism doesn't really exist. I mean, it does to a degree, but again, I'm helping people to accomplish things, to do things better in a business context that is persuading effectively, giving a good presentation, getting the results that you want, sending an email, right? And so in that sense, you can see that plagiarism doesn't exist, but I do understand in university and sort of school context, this is an issue. This is a really big topic, and I think it's going to take some really careful consideration on behalf of smart educators. My initial thoughts, really kind of uninformed, but my initial thoughts are that we need to rethink assessment. We need to rethink the way that we think people are learning in some ways. What value is an essay anymore, a typical school essay, if ChatGPT can produce a perfect one, right? Yes, I'll be dealing with other AI tools. Is ChatGPT... Oh, sorry, I heard an echo. I think that was my own echo. Okay. Yeah, so I think a lot of these lesson planning, we're going to get into that right away. Okay. And one and two-way tasks. So one-way tasks are if information is traveling one way, right? So if I am, let's say that we're doing a listen and do type of task where you simply listen to me describe some directions and you follow them on a map, for example, would be one way. If we're exchanging information, say in a jigsaw type of task, that is a two-way task. So, right, the way that tasks are designed. Yeah, exactly. Okay, so thank you for the questions. I'm sorry, I'm not going to give much more attention to the plagiarism issue besides the fact that it's really important. But I do think if you think about the context of people actually needing to do things with language, then think about how can we work around that? It is a very interesting topic.
That's
okay.
revolutionizing EFL for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. Which might be beyond the scope of a 2-hour workshop, right? It might involve some really smart people to think about it for a long time. So, okay. So now, again, those questions that I didn't answer here, I really hope to answer them today. And if not, bring them back at the end if they weren't answered appropriately for you. And yeah, let's get started. Let's get into the material here. So there's going to be a couple of points here where I ask you to reflect. And what I'd like for you to do is just have somewhere handy to make some notes when we get to those points, because in the end, I'm going to ask you to do something with those ideas, okay? So at the reflection points, you're going to take a couple of moments by hand, whatever you want to do, but make a few notes, okay? Because they'll be useful later on, right? Okay. That'll skip for now. Okay, so this is probably relatively clear by now, based on the kinds of things we've already discussed in the questions, the quiz questions, right? But these are the things the principles that I have come to believe and understand through my experience of what works with myself as a language learner, as a language teacher, language coach, and the things that I've learned in my studies as well, right? And so I think we should all have a handful of principles that we believe in. And these help us to use tools more effectively. They help us to sort of determine whether all this new stuff popping up is any good or not, new methods, tools, techniques, whatever it is. If we have a handful of principles that we believe in that are backed by some kind of experience and research, we have a way to navigate, right? And so these are mine, right? That languages learned, teachers should provide input and opportunities for interaction, output. We do need feedback, I believe, right? So one of the quiz questions was that we learn only through feedback. I believe that is not the case, but I think feedback is very helpful, right? And there are a lot of different types of feedback. There's explicit and implicit feedback, and that's a whole area of its own. But yeah, I believe in giving feedback to my learners for various reasons, affective and cognitive. So this one seems like common sense, but again, I think will reveal how this is not the case in a majority of language teaching, that the lessons and materials are not focused on the things that the people in the learning need to do and talk about in the real world. And so hopefully we'll explore that today. And that this explicit language teaching is of limited value for language learning, not useless. But if we think back to my criticisms of PPP, that it should not be the main way that we try to approach language teaching, right? And you're free to have different beliefs about language teaching, but what I hope to illustrate is how having a set of principles helps us to navigate and be more effective in what we do. Okay, and why TBLT? Won't go through this in all the detail, but it is very research-based, right? Now, what that means is that it's designed on an understanding based on these theories of the way that people actually learn languages, right? It's very motivating, right? So it increases engagement and motivation, creates an interactive student-centered environment, right? You're doing things with language, typically enjoyable things. There's an element of engagement, activity there. It's not lecture style learning, that's for sure. Authentic language use, as we'll see, real, the way people actually really speak and do things with language. It doesn't isolate the 4 skills, right? It's not, we're going to write about this and read about this, and right. In real language use, I'm listening to you and speaking to you. Well, right now, I'm mostly speaking, but things are integrated. We do them together. We don't normally write without reading as we write to some degree, and vice versa, right? That's an artificial separation that TBLT helps to prevent, right? It's about communication, that much is clear by now, and it's very flexible and adaptable. So we'll look at some of the different ways and contexts that this methodology works in, right? And additionally, mostly how ChatGPT can help us plan this type of material. So the first version, just so you have an overview of what this sort of hard TBLT, which is something that Michael Long has written extensively about, is the TBLT that is based off of the things that people do in the real world with language, right? And that basically begins with the needs analysis. It moves into an analysis of discourse. So looking at the real language, the discourse that is used to accomplish these real world tasks, to then break that down into what are called target tasks. And these are the things that people do in language learning, in the classroom, in the training room, in the virtual training room, right? Designing, turning those into things that people do, pedagogic tasks in the classroom, right? Then actually doing the teaching and learning, right? And then assessing the learning and what that looks like from this perspective. There are people who are much smarter than me when it comes to TBLT, and I don't claim to be an academic expert on this. I claim to be somebody who gets immense value from this and has used versions of this to different degrees. And so I would like to show you this overview to give you some understanding of the kinds of things that I've done with ChatGPT. Okay, and last but not least, material selection. In the same way that with TBLT, we don't say, what language can I give students and then give them something to do with it in an artificial productive task? We think the same way with tools and materials. That's the way I think. So I don't think, how can I use ChatGPT and how can I use other software and then find something to do with it? And instead, I start at the end, right? And I say, what do I want my students to do with language? What's going to get them there? So what types of tasks and activities that we do are going to actually help them do that? And then what tools can support this process? Not how can I use this to teach X, right? It's an important distinction. Seems small, but I think it's important. When I start asking myself, what can I do? Ask somebody what you can do with a hammer and tell them to come up with 1,000 ideas. They can be very creative. It doesn't mean it's going to lead to something productive and effective for the purposes. This will be important later. This is where we're going with the rest of the material today. And we'll come back to this later and see to what degree you have received insights on all of these various purposes for ChatGPT in language teaching and learning. So here we get into some of the real stuff with ChatGPT, now that we have set the context more than thoroughly enough. So identifying needs, right? If we start at the beginning of needs-based language teaching, how do we do that, right? Well, we can't simply just ask learners, because if you've ever done this, they'll say, well, I need vocabulary, I need grammar, I don't understand this accent or something. And that can be helpful to some degree, but it still doesn't give us enough information to effectively design a language training program. I have never really found pre-published course books and those kinds of things. I've used bits and pieces of that before, but I've never found, it's not surprisingly, that they're not designed for my specific learners with all their idiosyncratic needs in specific contexts. So again, it's not about language items and forms. It's about real discourse and all of its complexity, all of the elements of communication, right? It's not particular words and particular structures. It's everything together holistically, which is also the way that we tend to pick up language as well, right? In a piecemeal kind of way. Now, this can be very time consuming. And I found some shortcuts in some ways that ChatGPT has helped. And so the first thing is that I work with accountants, so I've used this example in webinars before, but I could say, for example, what are 10 tasks that corporate accountants have to do in the English language, right? And in a business English setting, this is very often the case that we're thrown into new environments that, I had worked with IT and engineering before, and a couple of years ago took on accounting. I'm not an accounting expert, right? And so this is very useful for getting my own head around things. Okay, what do they do in a typical day? So thank you, ChatGPT. That's a pretty good overview. And how do I know if that's legitimate? Well, what I can do is turn that into a questionnaire to actually collect input from the kinds of people that I'll be working with, right? So from their supervisors and themselves, right? How often do you have to do this in your company? To what degree? And so simply with a prompt, ChatGPT, create a needs analysis questionnaire for me. This helps me narrow down and speed up this process of determining what it is that the people I'm going to work with have to do, right? And then, as I showed you before, once I collect this information, I can easily use ChatGPT to analyze the information and collect some insights about it that will be helpful for planning. After I have done the needs analysis process, I can move into organizing that into some kind of syllabus, right? So in a task-based syllabus, once again, to reiterate, we're looking at the completion of real communicative tasks in the real world, right? Is what we're concerned with, right? And so the way that that is typically done in this kind of TBLT is that you have to sequence the tasks that they do in the classroom, in the training room, in ways that gradually increase in complexity. That's outside the scope of this. That is an entire domain of its own in TBLT. But basically, the idea is that I'm not feeding people language. I am putting them through these communicative, pedagogical tasks in the classroom. And what I'm showing here is how we can, however we want to approach syllabus, we can simply prompt ChatGPT. I don't know how simple, but we can prompt ChatGPT to sort of help us take those ideas that we have and put them into like sort of realize them, right? To make them real. So this is what I've done in a brief version. This, of course, needed modification afterwards, but as a start, this is how I began to build a syllabus for B1 accountants in English, right? And you can see I've got units are based on the real tasks that they said they had to do in the needs analysis. I've got the tasks that they actually have to do that move from more input kind of things like reading and understanding a document into output type tasks, right? So the input first, which helps them implicitly build up the language that they're going to need to do more productive things with the language, right? Technically in TBLT, Lexis is one important component of discourse, but I put this here for my own. I said, hey, you know what, ChatGPT, put some key Lexis in there. And that was more for my own understanding in the beginning to think, okay, what kind of language are we going to encounter here? This did not appear on the final version of the syllabus. And then an exit task is, okay, if things went the way we thought they did, and all of this was done and done effectively, they should be able to do this thing in the end, right? And to me, that is more useful in the context of doing things with language than some written grammar exam that has nothing to do with actually conducting a compliance review or a financial analysis, right? And if you do this in front of me, there is also no plagiarizing, even though I said plagiarizing is not an issue so much, but still, that's one thing to consider. If you can set things up to be done in front of you interactively in an engaging way, it's really difficult to plagiarize them. So that's a really rough draft of a syllabus, but it's generated almost instantly based on the ideas that I wanted to input and the needs that I acquired. Now we're going to get into, I want to talk about a university context. A lot of you work in a university context or a school context, which I think will share similar things. And so I think this is a good model to use. In this case, let's imagine that there is a foundational course for university students, right? And this is quite typical. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of thing where people will go do a year or two of kind of study to build up their skills so that they can then study in English in their university, right? And I've seen all kinds of what I deem inappropriate methods for that. Here's a random course book that doesn't prepare you for studying economics. It's more general English or something like that. And to me, this is an ideal place to start revolutionizing ELT, right? Because it's really, you have everything you need there to set up this kind of program. And so to just start getting my head around it as the course planner here, I might feed ChatGPT some information, right? Always trying to give ChatGPT context for what I'm doing. So this person wants to study economics, needs a B2 level. Just to break it down, what are some productive and receptive skills that he'll need, right? And I generated this instantly with ChatGPT. And to me, this just skips a bunch of steps to clarify my thinking. Of course, everything needs to be checked, double checked. But this is much better than a blank slate, in my opinion, right? And it already starts sending me to the next step in the sort of creative or design process of where I'm going to go, right? And have you ever done anything creative, whether it's, I don't know, doing something like in the arts or even in designing materials and stuff? You might always know creativity seems to be about that next little insight that comes. And one thing I've learned by messing around with ChatGPT a lot is that it speeds up that process. And instead of getting weighed down producing this list myself, I have it, and then I get the next idea, and I get the next idea. So I take this, right, the receptive and productive skills, and as a starting point, and then I say, okay, well, here's some more information, ChatGPT, right? This actually comes from the website of a university's economics program, right? So the program that people are going to be attending in a couple of years, right? And this was information that I found as an outsider, right? So if I were actually working at that school, I would have much more deep insight into what the actual syllabus is. But just taking the courses here as a starting point from the website, feeding them into ChatGPT and saying, okay, so we're going to go back to that syllabus I'd produced before. We're going to orient it that way where it's task and project based. We want to be actually focusing on doing things, but I also want to make sure that they're getting plenty of practice with all 4 of these language skills, right? That we discovered in this step. And so the idea here is just simply telling ChatGPT, include this element into here, and let's try to produce something with it, right? So you might think about, even if you don't want to approach your syllabus in the same way as me, what elements can you build in with ChatGPT? How can you remix your syllabus? So given that information, I then generate the first draft of the syllabus. And so now I have each unit is based off of an actual course. So the idea here is that each unit prepares students for this potential course that they'll be taking, right? And so we have a series of tasks that they will be doing. We have a project, right? Right. So we can set the tasks up to serve a project, right? And then in the end, they complete the project. And again, I had vocabulary here. Doesn't exactly belong here. Still useful to consider, right? But I got a different idea. As I said, you quickly get ideas as soon as you generate one thing. I thought, you know what's interesting? We're talking about AI. A lot of teachers are, asking about how do we get our students to use AI? How do we get our heads around the future of, students themselves, right? Because they're going to be entering a world where they're using this stuff all the time. The reality, the real answer is that students are probably going to be teaching you to use AI, likely. But how can we think about incorporating AI into a curriculum, perhaps in useful ways that actually serve the purposes of the curriculum, of the syllabus, rather? So here we go. We had our original one. I asked ChatGPT to please replace this Lexis stuff. I'll put those words elsewhere and think about them later, with some AI-related skills, right, that are actually tied in to the thing. So here we have using AI to generate summaries of complex theories, right? So we can actually do that in the classroom and as a way of helping to accomplish these tasks, right? So we can build in the tech into the tasks that we need. And I thought, okay, this is a really good start. But then I thought it's not quite what I wanted yet. So I wanted to make it a little bit more relevant and connected to the actual unit. And I wanted to divide it into skills that are categorized in some way. So I thought about some of the useful things that I do with AI, right? Prompting, having a discussion, researching, refining, some categories of skills to help organize this more effectively. Right. Okay. So I guess that's the end of that. So this is just an idea, but this is something to think about, right? How can we actually use AI to think about building AI into the syllabus, right? Or anything else that you might want to or need to include in your syllabus. Okay, the next step here is analyzing discourse, and I was wondering how ChatGPT can help me do that. So many people are familiar with a traditional discourse analysis, where you're really looking at really specific details of word frequency and things like that. This kind of discourse analysis is different in that we're not looking at specific items. We're not looking at things in isolation. We're looking at language more holistically, right? And so what I tried to do here was get ChatGPT to help me analyze the discourse so I know how these communicative situations work. And by the way, you might notice here, my prompts, they're not very flashy. And what I don't think is necessary is having some real explicit understanding of how to craft a good prompt. I hope I'm showing here that you learn this by doing it. It's conversational. You practice this a lot and you start to get an understanding for how ChatGPT is able to take what you're giving it. So it's really important what you say, but I think you just have to dive in and then refine as you go, right? So, but this was mine. I said, basically, this is what we do in discourse analysis. We look to find out how the task at hand is done. We look for building blocks, rhetorical moves, conversational turns, right? And then I told ChatGPT, act as a discourse analyzer. I will type in discourse, the discourse type, and then I'll simply copy and paste a transcript in here. And I would like you to create a table where you analyze this for me. So I found a negotiation simulation on YouTube for this. I put the transcript in here. I told ChatGPT it was a negotiation, and then I just copy and pasted it in, right? I cut it off because it would be way too much text. And then ChatGPT gave me this really nice summary of how this kind of negotiation worked, right? And this would be really useful for me to incorporate when I'm thinking about the kinds of materials or what the task would look like in real life, right? So, and even examples, expressions, right? For expressing the relationship, the conversational turns, the language that is built in there. For me, this is a really useful way to use ChatGPT to analyze and understand how communication situations are done, right? Later, I will share with you a QR code where you can access this itself as a program using my prompt, right? So shared prompts is a really exciting new feature of ChatGPT, relatively new, and you can actually share prompts so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you could simply use this to start analyzing some of your own discourse. You can also modify it. You can say, start telling ChatGPT to do other things with it that are more fitting for your purpose, okay?
Sam, can I interrupt you with
Yep.
a question? Maybe anyone else has any questions, you can also jump in. So we're moving on from the needs analysis to the step where you analyze discourse, you analyze text. What is it for? Is it for input, or is it that model where students go from reception to production, whatever, negotiation, mediation thing, where they learn how to use the language that they need? Right? Is that the part where we analyze, where we choose the material, where we check that the material that we have fits their needs, or how can you clarify this?
Yeah. Right now, we're still really in the planning phase, right? So what we've done so far is we found out what the learners need to do, right? With the help of ChatGPT, some guidance and some surveys, and the economics website in that case, found out what they need to do. Found out some ways that we might think about breaking that down into things that we actually do in the classroom. And then now we're just, for our own purposes here as teachers, trying to analyze this situation so that we understand more effectively, for example, how a negotiation is done in real life, or how an economics lecture is done in real life, right? So this is all in the process of planning a course. We haven't actually done any teaching yet. And what I'll go on to next afterwards is how we actually start building this into a format, some materials and materials delivery.
It's like planning out the scenario, because we use the word scenario now with the national CPD, right? Is this the way to think about it, right? It's like think of a real life situation where you would need that.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So in this case, the real life situation is the negotiation, right? And so this is something I do with my own participants in a corporate setting. If I want them to become effective negotiators, this gives me a much more thorough understanding of what a negotiation actually is communicatively. Then here are some phrases for negotiating, which is the typical approach, right? Or here's some grammar that you might apply to negotiating, right? So this helps me as a course planner get my head around the situation and start to understand the kinds of things that I might need to draw my learners' attention to, right? And so one example of how this will be included is I might look at some of these examples from the transcript, and I might think about how do I get those to stand out, especially if they're salient and not easy for learners to notice when we're going through the actual material. If we're listening and reading a negotiation at the beginning, maybe I would embolden some of these things, for example, to encourage them to notice, right? Maybe phrases like, "We appreciate the opportunity to work with you," are an important part of showing politeness, and helping to push my learners to analyze that will help them ultimately to acquire it and to use it. So yeah, so that's right. And so I think the next thing that we get into will clarify some of that. How do we actually take what we've discovered here and build it into some materials, right? And so what we'll move into is the context. We'll go back to the context of the economics major, right? But first, I want you to have a reflection moment, right? Based on what you've just seen with the idea about a needs analysis, finding what particular students need to do, and creating a syllabus, taking your own contexts, how might you be able to do these things, right? Determine the needs of your students, create a well-designed and principled syllabus, and help you and improve an existing syllabus, okay? You can make notes to yourself if you want to throw some things in the chat here as well, and maybe we can just have a quick glance at the chat as we go, and we'll just spend a couple of minutes on this topic.
Yeah, I think it's a crucially important topic. I think before we even move on to actual, material design and assessment design, which is already technical, and we are all experts in that, being focused on the needs analysis is the whole revolution, right? Like having this complete change of planning setting, especially. We sometimes imagining your situation, Sam, where you work in a corporate setting and you train, financial or accountants to improve their English for their actual job needs, which is really, really nice and neat and organized. They definitely have specific needs and you can motivate them. It increases their internal motivation to learn English. For us, teachers in higher education or in high school or in middle school in English, sometimes motivating students is a whole different, mode of challenge for us, because we think like we think they have special needs, and we want to, bring them into academic needs when we talk about undergraduate students and expose them to all kinds of things that they have to do. But at the end of the day, when you ask students what they need, all they think of is just they want to pass an exam or they want to pass a Bagrut exam. So I'm just throwing this, my thoughts to everyone, and also, of course, to you, Sam, first. But if anyone has any comments, any questions, ideas, I think this is where we all have to begin with the needs analysis and having, either us or ChatGPT or students themselves, maybe using ChatGPT to set up those mini goals, mini needs for the upcoming months over course or a year or something, like having this built from the internal motivation, from the internal students' needs would probably make a huge difference, because for now, I'm not sure our vision of our learning outcomes.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge, right? So absolutely, I agree with all of those points. And so what I think we should remember here, or think about as a guiding principle here, is that learner-centered can have three meanings, and I think they're all important. One is that internal syllabus we talked about, which is if we're really catering to our students, we're catering to where they are at their level of linguistic development. The second is this needs focus, right? Where I've showed you what my accountants need to do, and I've showed you an example of what an economics student, pre-university, maybe before he goes to study economics, what he's going to need to do, right? And we're going to look at that next in more detail to prepare that economics teacher. That's a need too. But a third way to think about this learner-centered is the internal motivation, right? How can we create tasks and materials and self-study ideas that are actually the things that people simply want to talk about and learn about and use language to do, right? And that's another part of learner-centeredness. Yeah, absolutely. And I really hope that the stuff that's coming up will reveal that. And I've already seen some questions in the chat, for example, about what do we do if our syllabus is just given to us, right? What if we can't just create our own syllabus? We have to do this. Well, hopefully you've realized a little bit how you might plug that syllabus into ChatGPT and then plug in some of the wants and needs of your students and find ways, that's not something we can cover quickly in a webinar, but what I'd like you to see is the connection of, I've asked ChatGPT to kind of have a think about these elements I want to build into my syllabus. Well, have a think about how you can build in elements to your existing syllabus. And I hope we get to it, but later I want to show how we can take what I would consider a not very effective plan or lesson that we have to teach and turn that into something more motivating for the students, Elena. Yeah, so.
Ron, did you want to add something? You're also raising your hand.
Yeah, let's keep it. Let's.
Yeah.
If I could just, let me just, yeah, I just wanted to throw some keywords in there because it's just repeating what Sam said and what you said too, Elena. I think that if we're going to work with AI, we should have a little bit of understanding. We can Google the terms instructional design, because that's going to help us to put together and work with ChatGPT a little bit easier if we understand what instructional design is, because and then we can add our syllabus to that, because then we can do syllabus design and backward design as well too. But I think a key word in working with AI is micro learning as well too. So those keywords, micro learning, instructional design, syllabus design, and backward design will really help you to work more effectively with AI in putting a lesson plan together for your class.
That's right. Yeah. Thanks, Ron. Yeah, absolutely. And you're right. You're getting at something really important here that I hope I've also hinted at, is that learning to use these tools is almost useless if you don't have pedagogical understanding and some grounding of why you're doing what you're doing, right? So what I've hoped to reveal here in the initial part of creating a syllabus, a sketch of a syllabus, is exactly that, is backwards design, right? Is that you're looking at what do I want people to do with language and how can I get them there, right? And get them there in a way where they're actually doing things with language, right? And so that's exactly what that is a way to design a syllabus, right? And so the key thing that I wanted to outline here is that if you have that understanding and that way you want to design your syllabus, you can use ChatGPT to help you remix in some way. That can be creating one from scratch, or it can be taking one that you're given and trying to improve it in some way. Obviously, if you want to improve it, you know what ways it's not compelling enough for your participants, it's not rich enough communicatively. ChatGPT can definitely support with that. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully you've got some thoughts on this now. And I think, Elena, a lot of those points you brought up are going to sort of, the answers will reveal themselves. And then hopefully we have plenty of time for questions at the end if they don't. So back to where we were, right? We've looked at the way we can start thinking about some needs of this future economics student, right? We've talked about why it might not be the most beneficial approach to simply, give them a random course book that supposedly prepares them with general English, and instead to think about the things they're going to have to do with English and how that might be specific. And so what this might look like in training or in teaching, right, in the classroom is, okay, we want them to understand an economics lecture. That is the key task on our syllabus that we're working towards, right? And so what that might look like in a way from moving from more simple versions of that to ultimately more challenging up to the real thing would be something like listening to a piece of it so they have an idea of what it's going to be like. Moving into something where we're building up the schema and vocabulary work. One thing we have to think about is that these people are not, they're not in service. They're not working already in this field. And so they might have a limited knowledge of the topic. And so one of the things that we have to do as language teachers is help to build up the schema here, which naturally is going to mean building up knowledge about economics to some degree, right? It only makes sense if you think about it. We're not going to teach economics language in an isolated way. It has to be connected to the topic in a real way. So after we built up some language, we would do something like listening with an outline. We could produce an outline and listen and check off the topics, right? So you have sort of a guide. So you're not just listening to the lecture. It's not too over your head. You've got a guide. You can check off topics. Then you might listen and read along with an enhanced transcript. And by enhanced, I mean, we might take some of those discourse elements we discovered in the discourse analysis and embolden them and make them stand out because they're things that are important for our learners to notice. We want them to have a chance to pick them up, right? We might then move on to listening to the bit without a transcript. So it's like taking the training wheels off, right? And it's like now you just listen without a transcript. You've had the scaffolds gradually removed, and then you might repeat this over time in class or set it for homework outside of class to gradually build up the listening skills, the language, everything needed for this task of understanding an economics lecture, right? Now, this is just an idea of how this might be set up according to the principles that I outlined before, right? Let's look at how ChatGPT can mediate that process. YouTube, once again, wonderful source. I happened to find this almost immediately when setting up this. I said, okay, let's find an economics lecture. And this was actually perfect because this is an intermediate or intro to macroeconomics lecture, similar to what students will actually be doing and hearing. It's a real lecture in that it's not perfectly produced. There's some noises in the background, some chairs, some things like that happening, right? And so it's actually realistic. If people are listening to a lecture in real life, it's not going to be crystal clear quality, right? It's going to be a lecture, most likely. I mean, it depends, but so I actually found the real thing, and I thought, what better way to prepare people to listen to a macroeconomics lecture, right, than to actually have a macroeconomics lecture, right? So as you can see here, YouTube automatically generated a transcript. This transcript is very imperfect. I mean, it's got some mistakes in there and it's got some typographical errors. And I simply took the transcript and put it into ChatGPT and said, hey, fix this for me, right? It's all messy. There's some weird false transcriptions here, some mistakes, and the timestamps are here. All this stuff I don't want when I'm looking at this communicative situation. And this is a great use of ChatGPT. You can copy and paste a transcript into it and do this. And now I've got this nice transcript produced for me to work with instantly, right? So I've got the transcript produced, polished, and much better and ready to use from ChatGPT. So I've got the transcript. And then, okay, I want to see where this is. Now, I listen to it. I can take my own guess. I think, yeah, it's quite advanced, but let's just see what ChatGPT says based on the CEFR, right? How difficult is this, right? And this breaks down. It shows you what its understanding of the CEFR is. And then it says, based on the transcript, it seems to be at B2 or C1, right? The language is relatively complex. with a wide range of vocabulary and more advanced sentence structures. It's specific. However, he also explains concepts clearly and provides examples. I mean, that's all spot on in my understanding. If you were to listen to this lecture, you might agree with a lot of these points. And this is another use of ChatGPT, right? Is to analyze to assess. It's not perfect, right? But you can use that along with your own intuitions as a tool to sort of assess the CEFR level of a text to give you guidance in your planning. I took this transcript and I said, let's make some of the key terminology bold, right? As I mentioned before, noticing, right? I'm not going to be able to rote teach every single term and collocation and specialized language that participants need. So this idea that people, if they're encouraged to notice things, are more likely to pick them up, right? And so ChatGPT, I said, hey, can you make this bold, right? So that we can have these stand out in the transcript. If you remember, one of the things that students would do is listen to this segment of an economics and read this along with it, which helps them kind of, comprehend more, map the sounds to the words, and also makes these words stand out, right? To promote noticing. And that's another use of ChatGPT. So it's already taken the transcript, cleaned it up for us, and now we have it here helping us out by making things salient, making things bold. Now, remember back, so one of my initial tasks in this section is to create a discussion, or this could also be something that's done as a research task, right? But if we think back to language being learned by using it, by doing it, by having lots of meaningful repetition, and needing to build an understanding of economics for people who are going to study economics, well, what if we do both of those by creating a list of questions with the terminology that they're going to need to know? That's also the answers to these questions are going to be very important for understanding the basics of economics, right? So I can say, let's take those discussion questions using the key language that we've isolated for discussing economics, right? And so now we've got all these questions. If I've got people who have an economic understanding, we might just go through and talk about these. But again, for people preparing for foundational English, you might set this as some kind of group work, right? They might go and research and find the answers to these questions on their own, prepare mini presentations. There's a lot of ways to use this, but just thinking about engaging people with the material and with the language, which we were very easily able to extract from ChatGPT. I mentioned also one of the simpler versions of understanding an economics lecture that you're hearing would be to follow along with an outline, right? And so ChatGPT, again, this just illustrates a function of ChatGPT is, hey, can you create an outline of that section that we're working with? And here it's got instantly, right? So what they could do is listen along to this. Let's say they've got a 3 or 4 minute segment. They listen along and they check off the topics that they hear. Maybe I would include a few things in there that were not mentioned, right? And say, can you find which ones were not mentioned, right? Again, it's like having training wheels, a form of scaffolding, simpler than doing the thing without training wheels, right? But one possible way. And also just to outline to you here, one of the nice uses of ChatGPT, generating the text, but also outlining the text, right? That's kind of the bigger principle I'd like you to think about here is, look how ChatGPT can just take a text and do something with it, right? Outline it, transform it into something completely different, put it in a different order, transform it into a different genre. That kind of remix function of ChatGPT is, I think, brilliant and very, very useful when planning materials. Creating materials, right? Okay, now I mentioned in my kind of teaching that testing is not often what you think of as testing, right? It's not, I don't want to find out what your CEFR level is or if you're able to sort of do grammar exercises or something like that. I want to know if you can do the things, right? So in my accounting context, it's very much, okay, can you, according to a rubric, which I'll show you in a bit, do this this task in some way, right? Can you do the negotiation? Can you call the customer respectfully? But what about for something like understanding a macroeconomics lecture? Well, I don't know of much of a better way than a simple comprehension test, right? And so a couple more things to illustrate the power of ChatGPT here is that when we want to create the assessment, again, this is not a detailed analysis of creating assessments. It's more or less to illustrate the capabilities of ChatGPT, okay? And then for you to have a think later about how you might apply that to your own use cases. Or perhaps to go into it in more detail in a structured course or something like that. So here I've got some comprehension questions. ChatGPT helped me produce these very instantly. Of course, I double check them and make sure this actually is a good set of questions that really captures the essence of the lecture that I want my participants to be able to understand, to say that they've crossed this off the list. Another really interesting thing here is you might think about quiz or test software that you use already. And things like quizzes, this can be done with Google, Microsoft Docs, I've done this with. And this is similar to what I showed you in the beginning about using ChatGPT for data analysis. But I've simply, as an example here, put the questions in, right, to a Google document. And because Google Documents will compile, you might know if you've used Microsoft Forms or Google, it'll compile the questions and answers into something like this. It would have the student's name as well. And then there would be, this is just one example set, but for every student, there would be a row. And now what I have is, okay, I've got all the questions and I've got the answers of one student here. What can I do with this so I don't have to manually read through every single answer in extreme detail? I work with just a couple people at a time typically. So I'm really doing all the assessment, so to speak, as I go. But to put myself in the mind of a busy university teacher, for example, with 100 or more students, I can imagine that shortcuts would be wonderful and welcome. And not to have ChatGPT do the work, but to use it to help. So I simply copy and pasted this. And you can see it's quite a mess, all the questions here and all the answers below. Back to the beginning, you could also use the GPT plugin that I mentioned in the beginning and simply upload your document and then ask ChatGPT to do these things for you. Can you do this? But keep in mind, as I mentioned, I'm not really looking for 100% grammatical accuracy necessarily. I'm looking for, can they do the task? Can they answer the question in a comprehensible way? Right? So I'm not testing them on their grammar and vocabulary use. I'm testing them on did they understand and can they communicate that? But as I mentioned, feedback is also an important thing, right? And so what I want to do is give them a chance to get some feedback and also demonstrate to you how ChatGPT could be used to give feedback. This could be in exam situations, but it could also just be with people's submitted written work, or even how you might have your students interact with GPT in the form of chatbots or talking to ChatGPT itself. How can we have it give us language feedback? Well, here I have, first of all, the answers to the question, right? And people have asked me, would you trust ChatGPT? And that's a tricky question. Do I trust a tired teacher to effectively analyze all of these answers, right? That's also a good question. So I think teamwork is the best way to approach this. We can use ChatGPT, right? So I said, generate the, right? So it gave us the answers. And you can see here, the answer is not grammatically correct. Macroeconomics is study of big picture, like whole economy. And it says it's correct, right? So I can double check that. Yes, that is correct, right? This one is incorrect, right? So I can have it generate a general, was this right or wrong, for me to help me speed up the process of grading, right? But again, to illustrate the bigger principle, maybe you don't want to do this at all, but you can think of ways that you can use ChatGPT to collect data, to collect answers to certain survey questions and things, and then turn them into an analysis that you can actually work with or do something with. I mentioned feedback, and here is the feedback sheet generated by ChatGPT based on that student's answers, right? So again, we said macroeconomics is study of big picture. This gives the student actual language feedback. But remember to use articles and is the study of, right? So they get specific language feedback on their items. So you're turning a test into a learning opportunity. Why not use as many things as possible as learning opportunities? And ChatGPT can support that process.
Sam, we have some questions in the chat. Can you go back to the prompt that you gave ChatGPT in order to produce the table?
Yes. Okay. So what did I say?
Yeah.
Yeah, and by the way, these slides will all be available as well, so you can go in more detail to see exactly what I said and what was produced, right? But this was the one here, right?
Read it out loud for everyone to read.
Yeah, so my Zoom toolbar is, anyone know how to move that?
Okay, the following text contains the student's answer to the text. To the test, create a table. In the first column of the table, include the question. In the second, include the student answer. In the third column, include whether or not the answer was correct. Include a final score for the exam based on correct, non-grammatical accuracy. Following the table, generate a feedback report with personalized feedback on the language errors to help the student improve their English.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. So somebody was asking about the prompt then, yeah. Exactly. So you can see here what I'm doing is with great detail, right? I have a visualization of what I want in the end, and I'm telling ChatGPT everything that I want. So I'm literally imagining this ideal table in the end and these results and saying, this is what you need to include. And so for me, one of the most important things about prompting is being very detailed about what you want, right? Don't expect it to read your mind. Be very detailed about what you want and the principles that you're putting into it and what you'd like to come out the other side. Okay, and that helps to produce really good results, right? Again, trial and error. If you don't get what you want the first time, just keep pushing ChatGPT and you'll start to develop this understanding about its capabilities and limitations and the way that you need to communicate with it to get the kind of results that you want, right? So there we had our test results and we had our personalized language feedback, right? And this also demonstrates how ChatGPT is able to give you feedback in different ways. You can have a conversation with ChatGPT and say, hey, let's have a conversation and give me feedback. Now, Elena, you'd mentioned before, what can students do? And we'll look at a chatbot shortly. But that's one great capability here is engaging in conversation, engaging in dialogue, and then producing feedback for you, right? In real time or in this kind of way here where we're providing it in this form. I'll go through this quickly because it's outside of this and we're not having as much time as I would like to have. But this is, again, in my context, getting my head around what is a payment negotiation, right? So an accountant, a big company responsible for trying to reduce the amount of money that their company is paying for a product or service, right? And in addition to the kind of discourse analysis that I showed before, I might just get a really good overview here of what makes this good, right? And ChatGPT can generate some ideas. And again, I would always run these by people to see, is this legitimate, right? But it's a really good starting point. And once you've collected information about what the successful communication looks like, you can turn that into a rubric, right? And so this is something that I might use with my participants. We might work in training on their ability to do and show these things. And then, of course, we would naturally see and discuss the language that goes along with it as we do role plays and watch videos, and they get feedback from me. And then we say, okay, can you do these things? And if not, what elements can we work on? So in the next version, we're going to try to show empathy a little bit more. What ways do accountants do that? And then we might even use ChatGPT. Hey, how can accountants show empathy? Give some examples, right? And so we can work on specific elements of people's communication situations. So we've looked at two forms of assessment here, really simply a comprehension test, right, on a lecture. And we've looked at this example here, which is creating a rubric. This is a very simple rubric, but again, in a task-based approach, I want to know, can people do this? I trust that they're going to improve their ability to do it over time, but can they do it to particular standards? This can also get more detailed. If you're given particular standards that they need to be able to, you can build in those elements, right? Again, for demonstration purposes, I want you to think, okay, so ChatGPT can potentially be used to see what success looks like with a particular item and turn that into some useful kind of rubric. This is a simple version for presentation's sake that's easy to get your head around. Okay, somebody asked about, are you going to demonstrate other tools? What I'm not going to do is demonstrate a whole bunch of all these tons of tools that are coming out that are built on ChatGPT. For many reasons, I think getting familiarized with the language model itself gives you the most control over your work, because a lot of other tools simply create a user interface over the top. So it's basically made a prompt and limited so if you use a lesson planning program based on ChatGPT, many times it actually takes options away from you instead of giving you options. So what I like to primarily demonstrate is how to master ChatGPT and then how to integrate it with other tools in a flexible way, right? Now, these are our words from our economics situation, our economics whole lecture that we've been looking at, right? And I said, please give me the list of those words, but use a comma. And so this is to demonstrate the format that you want ChatGPT to produce. Use a comma instead of a colon. And here's why. You're probably familiar with Quizlet, right? And Quizlet happens to have a comma feature, right? So I've taken the words extracted from my lecture, right? The words that we've deemed to be the most important for students to understand, inserted them into Quizlet, and now we've magically got our words. Normally, I wouldn't do isolated words. This is for example's sake. I would do collocations and chunks and phrases, and even full sentences I think are better. But just to demonstrate, we've taken a list, copy and pasted into Quizlet, right? And now we've got a set of study cards. I can easily share a link with my participants, and they can repeat these words as needed throughout the course, right? Throughout the module. So that's integrating ChatGPT and Quizlet. Another thing that we might do, right? So here we've got our text, right? Let's go to the point of what macroeconomics is. This is from our presentation earlier, okay? And well, a classic way to approach this for lower level learners, let's say they're A2, is, can we make this simple, right? Can we make this simple? And so asking ChatGPT, hey, can you rewrite this so it's understandable? So this way I'm doing what I mentioned before, which is starting to build up some of the terminology and some of the schema slowly for lower level learners. ChatGPT is quite good at simplifying. And if you don't get what you like, just keep pushing. Say, maybe try it simpler. Some people have had good results. Say, explain it to a 12-year-old, explain it to a 10-year-old. I think this did just fine, saying, produce it for an A2 level English learner, right? So simplifying is one thing you can do with ChatGPT. Another example is, and it's often argued in TBLT especially, that we don't always want to simplify. Because what happens if we simplify is that we actually remove the very words that we want our learners to learn, right? So in this example here, we have some of the terminology in place, but we also cut out some of the key language. And so one solution is to elaborate the input, which means adding further explanation to the terms, right? And again, to demonstrate here how ChatGPT can be used to modify texts in useful and interesting ways. So here I have that, you can see that the sort of initial version is very short, and the modified version is quite long, right? But that's because we're building in all kinds of redundancy here. For example, let's look at EPS, right? Earnings per share. And in the initial version, it's not written out, right? So let's say a lower level English student with limited economics understanding is not going to know what that means, and that's going to cause confusion. Whereas here we have EPS, but it's also written what it is, earnings per share, with a measure of the amount, and it tells what it is, right? So this is elaborating input. And something else you can think about besides simply simplifying all the time. Can we use ChatGPT to do things with text that are more like this, right? So that's elaborating the input. Now, speaking of other tools, I want to demonstrate how we can use other tools integrated with what we've done with ChatGPT. So what I'm going to show you next is how we can take the text that we generated, the simplified version, and how we can produce, I could just read that to students, or I can use one of these wonderful, this is called 11 Labs, and this is a tool for creating realistic voice. So this is AI voice that I'm going to show you. And again, we've taken a complicated lecture from YouTube, simplified a part of it using ChatGPT, and now we're going to hear what that sounds like. So again, we can create listening materials that are useful for people with a lower level of English who need to study economics in a couple of years. Here's what that sounds like.
Let's talk about macroeconomics. Macro means big. So in macroeconomics, we study big things. We don't look at one person or one company. We look at all people and all companies. We want to see how they work together in different markets. Markets can be for goods, money, or jobs. Let's explain some words. Economic agents are the people or groups we study in macro.
Okay, so you can see it's a nice speed. You're able to choose the speed at which that works.
Let's talk about macroeconomics.
And again, that's using commonly available tools that are out there. 11 Labs is not free. You can sign up for a free version of this and get a certain amount of credits that you can use per month. And to create one or two of these nice, there's all kinds of different voices and accents, and you can adjust the speed and things like that. So really interesting, I think, shows a lot of potential. And I quite like it, again, for students who are not ready to listen to that initial lecture, or just creating listening exercises for tasks in general. Okay, this will be quick, but we've talked about a kind of in-depth version of TBLT, where we are basically backwards designing, as Rob mentioned. We're starting at the end. We're starting with, what do I want them to do in the world with language, even if it's 2 years down the road, and reverse engineering the process and how ChatGPT can support that. But this is a lighter version of TBLT, and many are familiar with this. And this doesn't involve redoing your entire curriculum, right? Or anything like that, right? This is the typical task cycle, where this is that other definition of task that we discussed. Communicative, right? Non-linguistic things, right? So this could be telling an anecdote, planning something with others, many different things, that communication activities that we do, communicative tasks in English. This is a very simple framework, right? You set the context. If we're planning a trip, I might say, oh, let's talk about all the places you've been. What are your travel preferences, right? You have a discussion, and then your learners go and they plan, right? They use the internet or something, they plan a trip, right? And you're monitoring that and giving feedback in there. And then afterwards, after they report on their task, you might focus on some items, specific language items from that if you choose, and then repeat the task again, right? So this is a classic sort of, many people are more familiar with this TBLT methodology. And I wanted to show how ChatGPT can make this kind of thing happen rather quickly. Again, I'm showing you a ton of possibilities here. And what I'm hoping is, even if 3 or 4 light bulb moments happen, that you go back into this and have a look at the prompts that I used, the tools that I used, and explore it further, right? But I wanted to show you as many interesting possibilities as possible. So this is a less strict kind of thing. This is, sometimes we're just focusing on telling anecdotes. It's a thing we do socially and in business. And the iPhone version of ChatGPT has a built-in, you might see a built-in microphone button if you use it. And this isn't really just an ordinary, transcriber. This uses what's called Whisper, which is OpenAI, the company that owns ChatGPT. It's a super high quality, really, really good transcription software. So even teaching virtually, the way that I did this was, a participant of mine was retelling an anecdote. One thing I'll do is, if we're telling anecdotes, and I want everyone to participate, I'll say, hey, can you tell us what she just said? Tell us what Petra can you retell that story for us? All right, that gives them a reason to actually pay attention to the one person telling the story. There might be some of my feedback built in, right? So retelling the anecdote that somebody told. And while she told this, I transcribed it with my phone. I simply held my phone to my laptop speaker and transcribed this retelling. And you can see here, there are bits and pieces of negotiation of understanding. She was asking questions. She's like, did you do this? Or it was this, right? Or it was 1 week before the birthday, right? So you can see that there's a bit of discussion built into this story, right? So telling an anecdote, right? And so in the classroom, this can happen, or a student could simply do this. We could guide students to do this with ChatGPT or with chatbots. What can we do with this in a task-based kind of way? Well, first I said, can you rewrite this story for me? Keep it basically the same, but with small improvements to my original. It was told by an English student, and I want to offer a nice model version. And so ChatGPT produced this a little bit over the top, I have to admit, version of this anecdote of a story that happened to one of my learners. But there's some really interesting little things in there we might think about, like a humorous twist of fate. You can see that in the original version, the concert was great, fantastic, and a famous event for Petra, and it was great. Okay, great, you got your message across. Maybe there are learners who want to make their language more colorful for telling stories. And so we might highlight the fact that it proved to be nothing short of exceptional, right? Quite useful in this story as a piece of language. So the model here is transcribe the communicative situation, be that a conversation or a presentation or a story, have ChatGPT help to produce a model really quickly. And then let's try something else. Provide your original version almost identically, but where there are difficult words or phrases, keep them in the text, but explain what they mean. Because as you can remember with elaborating input, why would we want to take those great things out? And what I quite liked here was in a humorous twist of fate, which is a funny and unexpected change in the situation. Great. They can read that, begin to develop what a humorous twist of fate was, have exposure to it, right? I don't remove it, the possibility of them learning that. Same here, a word like serendipitous, right? It's a big word. Date turned out to be serendipitous or unexpectedly beneficial. And this worked really well. They said, oh yeah, I can see through context what that means because I've provided the context, right? So we've got the initial version. We have a potential model of how the task can be done, right? And then remember, there is a post-task phase where you might focus on specific elements of the task or specific language items. ChatGPT can support that process as well. I said, okay, show me the differences that you made, right? And so it provided me with the original story, right? And it provided me with the changes. And so I could already see multiple things that I could do with this here. For example, I could say, put these items in order, right? So I could put these in order and they'd have to read and process the sentences in order to get the story in the correct order, right? So that's called a discourse scramble, where they have to actually put it in the right order. And in order to do that, they have to read it. The other thing I might do is simply have them match these items up together. So I say, okay, here's your version. Let's find the way from the other version and have them sort of match them, right? Probably less useful, I think, because you don't really need to pay deep attention to the sentences in order to match them. But what you can also use ChatGPT for is coming up with more ideas. And so I said, okay, given the original transcript that I gave you and considering the language and storytelling elements, what would be some potential communicative tasks to help learners move from their version to one more like yours? And ChatGPT gives me all these ideas, right? And so realistically, what happened in my context is I use this for post-planning purposes. So we did the anecdote, we read the new version, we highlighted some language, we retold the story. I took this away later and said, you know what, for next time, let's go back to that story and do something. And ChatGPT gave me these wonderful, not all great, but some are really cool ideas of how we can communicatively work on building up the skills right? And so again, to reiterate here, this is to take a more simple TBLT, not necessarily out of a, say you don't have the opportunity to plan a needs-based syllabus, but you want to include some communicative elements in a low prep way. Well, you might consider a guide like this TBLT and how ChatGPT's functionality can support you in doing that quickly, right? And easily. Okay, I do want to move towards the end here. I think we're going to not have as much time at the end for the breakout rooms, but I still think we will I think we'll benefit here from these last few items anyway. Can I have an idea of what's wrong with this according to given my perspective, right? I'm not saying I know everything, but given what you understand about me, or not me, what I've said here, what could potentially be some problems with this? Maybe just put some ideas in the chat. This is a standard, very typical, popular course book. So based on some of the things that if you were forced to use this and you didn't really care for it, but this was your syllabus, for example, what problems might you notice with this or things you'd want to improve? And just put some things in the chat if you want. Yep. So Elena, yeah, exactly. Not based on a particular student's needs. In fact, when things are mass produced for people all around the world, they're by nature generic and not based on the needs, right? Yes, skills are isolated. Exactly. So it's crazy if you look at how disconnected the writing, yeah, they're all there, but why not connect them in some meaningful way? Irrelevant to Aurelia, yep, exactly. Not an evenness in students' levels. That's exactly true, right? So, and again, with the internal syllabus, right? And also, if you look at the way that grammar items are presented here, right? I mean, who's to say presenting the present perfect continuous that any or all of the learners are ready? And most importantly, too, is that I'm presenting that at the expense of meaningful practice with language, which would give all learners opportunities to pick up things that are specific. Life skills, okay. Yeah, I mean, right, that's interesting. It might be good to include. So what, it's up to us to customize them to our learners. Yes, that's true. That's true. And that's exactly what we're going to look at here is how ChatGPT might help us customize this to help see outside of the, okay, I'm stuck doing this, right? I'm stuck doing this as is, okay? And so here, just for example's sake, taskifying a course book. I'm not the first person to say this. A couple of proponents of TBLT, Neil Anderson and Neil McCutcheon, they're really, really good teacher trainers based in different places in Europe. They've written a wonderful book. Actually, I've got it here. This is Activities for Task-Based Learning. A lot of amazing ideas for using the Willis, more like the Willis framework and how you can adapt that. But they did a couple of webinars on taskifying a course book, right? And what they said made a lot of sense. It said, why don't you start basically by looking for what is the productive, what is the communicative thing here? And so if we do that in this case, just for example's sake, we look here and we see, okay, writing about a book or a film, so expressing our opinions, maybe writing a film review, it says, or here, talking about you, what's the last book or film that you read? Okay, so I won't do that specifically, but I think, yeah, those are things that we do. We talk about our experiences with books, films, products. We might even write a review and share it on Amazon or TripAdvisor or something like that. Those are legitimate things that we do and also have a lot of rich language potential. So I'm just going to ignore all of this stuff here for the reasons that we've already discussed and focus on here and use ChatGPT. And again, you can think about this when you're stuck with a syllabus that you don't have much control over. What is the productive thing, right? I want them to be able to discuss their influences on purchasing decisions, read and understand the reviews, discuss products, and write a review, right? These are the ways, according to the principles and the things that I understand, that we can do that, right? And so let's just quickly have a look at what I think is a more interesting way to do this. Here's a quick outline of it. They're going to discuss, they're going to start with them, right? Not put it at the end, but they're going to start by discussing their preferences and the things that they like. Then, having primed them with that, they're going to read 4 reviews and rank them. Are they 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, 4-star reviews? It is a good review or a bad review, and why? Then they'll collaborate to complete a dialogue. So again, with scaffolding, not having the full conversation, but maybe a chance to consider what you would say as for your half of the conversation, consider that with a group, then conduct their own dialogues, right? Recommending or not recommending a product, and then writing a review, right? So again, we have the writing a review, having the discussions, lots of input, and ChatGPT can help produce that stuff really quickly and easily, right? So the first thing I said was write 4 product reviews ranging from 1 star to 4 stars, right? And it did. It does a really good job with these kinds of texts, I find, right? And you can always say modify them accordingly, right? But you have a lot of nice language in here, high expectations, completely dissatisfied, right? So I've got the reviews that they're going to read. So they'll have the discussion. Eventually, they'll read the reviews, right? And again, exploring the Lexis, showing how ChatGPT can help us explore the language, provide a list of key vocabulary and collocations from the reviews that are associated with their rating, right? Not worth the upgrade, battery drains faster, right? Again, collocations, phrases, chunks, always better than isolated words, right? You get more bang for your buck. You pick up natural language, right? So I've got the vocabulary I need. I've got the reviews, right? And then I said, okay, now take the 3-star review. And so back to text transformation, write it as a dialogue between 2 friends. And here you go. Yeah, hey, was it worth the upgrade? Well, it's not bad, but it doesn't have any groundbreaking changes, right? And so if you've ever asked ChatGPT to produce a dialogue, sometimes you'll find, oh, that's really like corny, cheesy, unnatural, something you'd see in a course book. How is it any better? Well, the beauty is that you can simply say, make it more natural. And it will, right? So if I didn't like this conversation, I could say, ChatGPT, make it a little bit more formal, or do it in Shakespearean English just for fun. You can have a blast with that stuff. You can say, use different varieties of English, use you know, Liverpool slang. Like, it's crazy, the things that it will incorporate just for your own amusement in modifying the text, right? So then I said, now rewrite the text so that the first friend's name is Christina and the second's is Mike. Also remove and replace with a line. So this was an idea of a task I had where they'd work together to come up with some ideas for what they might say in this conversation, right? So they've already had their own conversations. They've read these reviews. They've ranked the reviews, right? Decided which ones are good and bad. And now they're moving into this, right? They might, we're also going to show here how language is flexible, right? And there are a lot of ways. They'll probably all come up with different ideas before comparing to the model and reading the actual conversation or hearing the actual conversation if we make it into audio, right? And so that's what we've done. And what I want to just show here is how to take all this, one way to incorporate it into something much more presentable. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with this feature of Word, but basically, if you open Microsoft Word into outline mode, right? So I've told ChatGPT, I don't have the prompt here, but I've said, put all of this material in an outline for Microsoft Word, for a slideshow. I want the title slide. I want this for the name. And then I want each review on a different slide. And then I want the conversation on the final slide. And I've told ChatGPT that, copy and pasted that into Word, opened in outline mode. And then what you simply do is create levels. So what you want to be the title of each slide, you set as level 1, and then the text you set as level 2, right? This is not a detailed description of this. It's showing you the possibility, which you can easily find out how to do this later. So for me, this was a lifesaver because putting things together in a way that look presentable, particularly for virtual environments, I think can be a mess. So I've got everything I produced in 15 minutes on ChatGPT, and then you can save that, right? And you can export this into PowerPoint. So I opened PowerPoint, clicked Insert, New Slides from Outline, right? And then I opened the Word file that I had saved, and voila, One click later, so I clicked on design, and this is AI too, by the way. Microsoft Designer, that's over here on the right side, gave me a selection of designs that I can use to present this material. This is a really, really simple one. There was some more complicated ones as well, but there I've got my material to present in PowerPoint form. I could also take the PowerPoints and use them as a, say, a Jamboard or whiteboard program background, okay? And use those. Look, we're gonna run out of time here, Elena. We wanna go for a hard 11 o'clock stop?
Yeah, it's gonna be 12 in 5 minutes here.
Yep.
And
Oh, 12 there, okay, okay.
We'll need a break, yeah.
Okay, okay. So let's just quickly finish here. What I want to just show you here is this is this is word wall. So like with the commas with Quizlet, right? You can use word wall and copy and paste as a table, and then you've got language activities using word wall as well. Sorry, we have to rush, but again, a reflection for you to consider. Okay, have a deeper think about some of these things. I think Elena and I are going to be offering a more in-depth course in the autumn, and she'll tell you more about that or send you more information about that, where we go into the nitty-gritty, the details. We work so that you'll actually produce a course of your own using the principles that we showed today, because it's really not enough in 2 hours. What I hope is that you kind of get some social learning. It's more not me telling you what to do, but me showing you some of the things. You can literally see what I've prompted in my thinking and start thinking about how that might apply to your own work. This is all stuff that should be clear by now, right? Is that I don't simply tell ChatGPT to do everything for me. I stay in the loop. It's always me in a conversation. This is what I want. I get the feedback and I keep producing it, right? Learn to use it by using it, right? I personally don't believe in long, complicated scientific ways of looking at prompting. Do it. See what works, figure it out, like learning to have a conversation with a friend, right? You don't learn how to have a conversation with a friend with a manual. You learn it by doing it, right? And pedagogical principles are essential. This we won't have time for. I want to show you 30 seconds of this. Annie, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. How about you? How is your journey going?
I'm actually back. This is me having a conversation with a chat bot called Call Annie. She's free to use. She is an iPhone app. She is basically, you're interacting with GPT through this interface, right? So we had an entire discussion.
There are many ways that AI
and you can think about, can this be motivating for learners, right? It also transcribes the entire call, right? So you might think about what are the pros and cons of this. I want to stop here because I want to take 2 minutes to answer. Elena, if we could just maybe extract some, if there are any key questions that would be kind of most important here.
Okay, first of all, thank you so much. You guys have been amazing for such a long time. It's some of you wrote, oh my God, we need a break, but we can't leave because the information is so valuable. Sam, I'm gonna express a huge gratitude on behalf of everyone here. You can see that all 100 people stayed for 2 hours, and we are all blown away with so many ideas. I have been writing and writing myself with all different things that I wanted to, go into with details, but unfortunately we literally have just 1 minute left and we want to stick to our time. So let's, Leor has raised his hand, so let's give him a floor for 1 minute.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. Again, I completely wholeheartedly share all of the remarks here. This has been highly educational and illuminating. I wanted to ask one specific sort of a guideline. When you enable digital answers from the students, whoever they may be, you also provide them with access to ChatGPT. So how do you incorporate that into your evaluation and assessment process?
It's a great question. I don't. So just to reiterate, with my context, it's interesting because I'm able to work around that. So for example, in my context, it might be write an effective email, right? and let me see that in my inbox. And did you get the job done? And then we can see that it was good, like in a real email. If they used ChatGPT in my context, good for them. I think it's more difficult to actually use ChatGPT effectively if you're doing it in English. So I ask them to share their prompts with me. And I say, hey, if you can use ChatGPT to write a great email and understand that the discourse of what you're writing, because you actually have to understand that it's appropriate as well, right? I don't have a good answer for university context, but that's a seed to plant and to think about how can you work around that. I don't have a great answer for that, unfortunately. I can just show you some of the functionality, but fantastic question. Yeah. Maybe one final one here, Elena, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yes. Let's give Hagit a chance. Hagit, unmute yourself. Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, first of all, let me thank you for an amazing session. So many insights. I would like to ask you about, I'm an English teacher in junior high school, and I used to teach my students how to write a proper paragraph. I would like to maybe to get your advice. What should I do now? I mean, to give them the prompt, to ask them to write a paragraph on the basis of a prompt. What do you suggest?
It's a good question. Well, from the planning side, like I showed here, you can generate so many incredible texts with ChatGPT. And if we go back to input being the primary way that we learn, right? Interacting with input, you can provide hundreds and hundreds of great examples for your students, and you can get them doing things with them. So I showed at one point, I mentioned something called the discourse scramble, right? And so one simple thing I like to do with a paragraph or a short text is scramble all of the sentences. And this can be done for homework, right? Put the sentences back together. Do they fit cohesively, right? Because discourse, it's not just the ideas, it's the way the linkers work together. And that's just something to think about, right? And what else can you do with paragraphs? You could literally have people scramble the discourse for a paragraph, put the paragraphs in order for the whole text, right? You can do that. You can create all kinds of gap fills that are interesting. So that's one thing to think about, is actually, yeah. Exactly. Creating models for your students and then mixing them up into various ways that can get them working with and exposed to those. So great question. Yeah. I'm really, thank you for your comment. I'm really sorry for the lack of time. There was so much I wanted to share with you, and I'll say that was my fault, maybe cramming a little bit too much in here. Please, everybody, we'll send the PDF, okay? Please have a look at the stuff I skipped over. One thing here is that these are shared prompts. You simply scan these QR codes and you can have a lot of fun exploring things that I've already built. This is the discourse analyzer. This will help you think about generating task modules, for example, from the understanding the lecture. What are some ideas for making that simpler? It can give you a lot of ideas. This one generates 50 tasks on a topic that you give it according to Willis's task model. Really cool, but also make your own prompts, share them with your colleagues. This is amazing. You can generate basically your own programs of doing awesome things and sharing them with your colleagues. I think that's fantastic. Thank you so much, everybody. So sorry that we had limited time. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will be happy to answer any pressing questions that you have. Send me a message. Send me a message.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Very enriching and interesting, makes us create and motivates us. Thank you.
Yes, have a great, thank you so much for the feedback. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
We will invite you to our community in our course in October. So if you want to be connected with us on a weekly basis for a period of 4 weeks, there will be a short but intensive community of excited teachers of English who are using AI and ChatGPT. So we're inviting you to join, and you will get a special discounted early bird registration pre-sale today based on this your participation in the webinar. So thank you so much for joining, and look out for the email that I'm going to send you soon. Have a nice one. Have a great day.
Hope to see you all there.
What is your name on LinkedIn?
Sam Gravel, can you see the slide here? And
Not
you
really,
can-
because I'm using my phone. Just a minute.
Okay,
Let me.
and maybe Elena can throw that in the
I
email
will
as
also
well.
send you
Yeah.
Gravel.
link to his.
Okay, Gravel. Okay, thank you. I'll find you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Happy to
Okay.
connect with everybody and hope to see you in the autumn, right? It would be great.
Yeah,
So,
bye.
awesome. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.